thanks for coming, and thanks, Eddie, for the introduction. So I very much went for this being an evening theme. This is quite a light-hearted talk tonight, as you might tell by the title. And I feel like at this point should out myself. I research museums, museum studies, arts organisations, so I'm quite interested in the institutions and processes. I'm probably not what most people at Courtauld would define as an art historian, so I feel like I should put that caveat in before I probably mildly offend all the art historians in the room with my interpretation of Beyoncé and art history. So, a very important question of our time: can Beyoncé save art history? And indeed, does art history need to be saved from itself? Let's be honest, art history has an image problem. When we're asked what art history looks like, we probably describe the gilded halls of palaces around the world. We think of wealth and riches. We think of travel and aristocracy. This isn't a new problem. And indeed, it's quite a factual problem. Most of our national collections came from the kings and queens of the 17th and 18th century. Indeed, the French Revolution, in part, was caused by a desire to overthrow the riches of the king at the time. And the Louvre was opened as a result of that incident. It wasn't unique to France. We also saw the collections of the rich and the wealthy become open to the public in Britain as well, and across much of the Western world. I love this etching, and I love the title of it, Under the Watchful Eye of a Warder. Here we see in 1870, Jack Robinson and his family visit the South Kensington project, which today we would know as the Natural History Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum. Tolerated, almost permitted into the institution, but you had to apply for access. You had to be of good standing to be allowed to visit these great institutions, these museums. And why were they allowed to visit? Well, in part, it was due to Enlightenment. It was this idea that if poor people were given access to the finest collections, they would have an aspiration to do better, to better themselves, to become more industrious in their work. They were permitted to come into institutions, but they were not permitted to have a voice. There were a few conditions to really get access for the poor, the working classes, and even realistically the middle classes, if they wanted to access the greatest works in the world. It was important that they listened, that they took information. They were taken on guided tours of collections. They were shown the works that were of interest to their tour guide, to the curators, to the art historians. They were told the national narrative. They were told the story of the institution. They were most certainly not allowed to touch. They were most certainly not allowed to participate. Conversations and debate were ill-advised and not encouraged. The stories that were told were by rich white men. They were quite bland and boring because they told one story and one narrative. And let's be honest, we all have many stories to tell. And history is much richer when we start to introduce multiple perspectives. We all know that to be a woman to get into a museum, even today, you really need to find a man to paint you. The history of art and the museums that hold it have been white, male and pale for too long. And this was a reality in the 1700s, 1800s and 1900s and right into the new millennium. We do see slow changes, but it is still a reality. And particularly in the UK, we've seen a number of policy agendas from central government as a means to try and encourage the arts to be more accessible to a wide range of people. From the Second World War and the birth of the welfare state, we've seen initiatives such as audience development, community engagement and outreach. Hundreds of millions of pounds pumped into educating poor people so they could understand the fine arts. Money thrown in to bring black people and women into our institutions. For all that money, our institutions don't look that radically different when we look at who comes to visit them than when they did in the early 1900s. So, my provocation is, Should we move beyond talking about audience development, engagement, and outreach? And should we provide a platform for Beyoncé to open up our museums and enter a new dialogue on what art history can be? Beyoncé is significant for art history because she's asserted herself in a position of power. She's entered into the art history arena by claiming her rightful place. Unapologetic. Central is her argument of black excellence. So this isn't a case of inviting in a community group to tell their story. This is a case of Beyoncé hiring out the Louvre and saying, I'm so important, I can hire the Louvre and shoot my music video here. I'm not apologising for being here. Actually, this collection needs my story for it to have a cultural relevance today. Her husband has a little bit to do with it, but let's be honest, Beyoncé is the driver. And so, from there, what I would like to present to you today is the Beyoncé Manifesto for Art History. Given that her most significant work within the manifesto that I present to you tonight did involve her husband, he does get a minor mention. So what I thought would be really useful for my manifesto that I would present to you tonight is that I would take Beyoncé's own lyrics from her recent single, Ape Shit, to provide some pointers, yes, to art historians, yes, to museums, but also to members of the public, to those that visit museums. And so the first one, you need me, I don't need you. That's the reality, actually. Museums and art history needs diverse voices. Museums and art history needs to welcome people into their institutions, because do you know what? If they don't, they're dead. There's this thing called the internet, and it's really good at facilitating conversation and diverse voices. And that's a really important mindset for museums to start thinking about. Actually, it's really important, and you need to have diverse voices, diverse stories to make your collections relevant today. Secondly, I can't believe we made it. Actually, when we talk about art history, when we talk about diverse voices, whether it be through colonialism, discussions about race, discussions about gender, discussions about sexuality, we need to move beyond simply welcoming those voices in and adding those narratives to the interpretation of how we understand the national collections. We need to go one step further. We need to add the struggle. We need to add the social history around how artwork has been collected. And the social history conversations can be quite difficult because the social history conversations does centrally involve colonialism, which is a difficult conversation to have. But I can't believe we made it is a central narrative that museums need to think about. Give me my check, put some respect in my check, or pay me in equity, pay me in equity. Actually, really important, if you want to value people coming into your collection, if you want to value people talking about your collection to your collection, then they should be paid. We should value people equally. We look kind of quite a lot now at this gig-based economy within a social media discourse. And that's something that's really crept into museums and galleries. So actually, museums should be paying for your stories, but reversely, if you have a contribution that is of value that is missing from a collection, be it the Ulster Museum or any collection in the Western world, because they're all lacking stories, then you should demand respect for your story. You should demand a response that allows you to contribute in the same way that somebody with a PhD does, because actually, different voices have equal value and opinion. And finally, have you seen the crowd going apeshit? Let's be honest, when you invite diverse voices in, when you engage in interesting conversations, whether it's down the pub or in a gallery, when you meet people that you don't meet in your everyday life, when you have challenging conversations, that's when exciting cultural content has. And that's the reality. If Beyoncé can claim space in our cultural institutions, then we should follow suit and claim space equally, but also be confident in the value of our opinion and interpretation. So it's really important, I think, as museum goers, as visitors, that we're confident that when we post stuff on Instagram, whether it's a selfie or a serious comment, it has value, it has worth, it's your story. Curators have a really central role in telling a curated narrative and national tale, but actually we as individuals have very complex stories that we can add to this complex jigsaw and puzzle. And so this is a quote that I really think sums up this idea of being able to claim space, to enter into a narrative and demand to be noticed. They literally colonised the Louvre to celebrate who and what they are. So in conclusion, the history of art needs new voices. Beyoncé may be the person to bring those voices in. So my manifesto to you is be more Beyoncé, claim your space in the national institutions, claim your space in art history. What's your family's relation to art? What's your heritage in relation to national collections? Go beyond reading the interpretation and panels, use social media, talk to curators, find your space and find your story. Social media has provided us with a platform and a confidence to develop different narratives. So the one thing I would encourage you all today as you go away from this talk and hopefully go and see some art, be more Beyoncé, tell your story, tell us why that piece of art, why that exhibition is important or interesting to you. Thank you very much.